Hi, my name is Donovan Holden. I am a singer-songwriter and member of the LGBTQ community, and I have an album out called A Brighter Day.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. And on this week's episode, we are welcoming Donovan Holden, who is joining us all the way from sunny Los Angeles. So Donovan, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you. Yeah, I'm super excited to have you here and learn a little bit more about. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for making the time. I'm sure some folks are familiar with your music, and for those who aren't, I'd love to just share a little bit about Donovan's background. So Donovan enjoys putting music into the world, knowing that people will hear his voice and feel his spirit, and he loves getting feedback from his listeners. Growing up in South Florida, my home state, yay, he started writing songs in junior high school and has continued throughout the years. He loves to write music and started using samples and digital instruments to write and produce blues rock and R&B jazz music. Since then, he has released 2 albums produced by Patti Sanders. Donovan's harmonic imagination and the way he uses more interesting chord changes sets him apart from other songwriters. So Donovan, welcome to the show again, and you probably are maybe the second or third musician we've had on the program since we got started, and we've interviewed about 150 bosses now, LGBT entrepreneurs. So why don't you get us started and just kind of remind us, what is it about being a singer-songwriter that is very much kind of running your own business, and what's unique about that experience?
Well, for me, as far as running my own business, I'm my own producer. I finance all my own recordings. I hire all my own musicians and try to, come together, make arrangements, write the songs, produce the music, get it recorded, re-recorded, whatever's necessary. And then we get into the actually putting the music out in the world and getting the artwork done. There's a lot of things that go into it, getting some promotion and trying to get as many ears as possible for your music.
Wow. I mean, to me, that's a business enterprise. You're kind of doing it all. And, I guess a couple of sub-questions to that is one, how many people, you're self-financing all of this, how many people are part of an operation like that? Just to, you mentioned you have a new album out. How many people did you have to bring on board to make that happen?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever done an actual count, and I was surprised. I just wanted to write songs,
Yeah.
and maybe get people to hear them. And then when I wanted to put them out into the world, I found out, okay, I have to do all this other stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's well, there's probably a dozen musicians on my new album. It's actually my third album, A Brighter Day. There's probably a dozen musicians on there, including the background singers. Plus, you have my actual recording producer, Patti Sanders, and who also does the engineering on the projects. And we use different people for the artwork. Let me see. I hired someone for this album to do promotion. Gosh, and then you get into every album needs at least one video these days. So you start getting into. My husband actually helped me. He does a lot of drawing and has a couple books out of his own. And he helped me put together an animation video for this album. And then we have a really good editor that we use and brought all of that together for a video for a song called Lunch in Paris. Altogether, it's probably 20 people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Rough estimate.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was trying to tally up everybody who's involved. And we've had a number of authors on here, and you mentioned your husband is also an author. And I see a lot of parallels for those folks that go down the self-publishing route of producing a book, something like a knowledge and like you having a vision that you started where you are truly a musician and your whole, everything you want to do is just to play music, right? And lo and behold, you now have a business as well. You didn't imagine kind of going out probably when you were in junior high writing your songs thinking, okay, I'm going to be managing this whole enterprise to make, basically like a music studio of some sort. My question for you then is what is the benefit of doing something like this on your own, breaking out on your own. And I forgive my parallel, but I'm just thinking of someone like Ani DeFranco, in the 90s, who kind of said, no, I do not want to be a part of kind of like a production company owning my work. I want to own my own. I want to be an indie artist. So I don't know if you identify with that or not, but just kind of seeing you as an independent producer. What are, I guess, like the pros and cons of doing something like that?
Well, the pro is obviously that you have total control over how you present yourself. Mm-hmm. And you have control over the timing of the process. And that's all well and good. You're collaborating with whoever you want to collaborate with. I guess the downsides would be is I don't have the infrastructure that a major label would have to get my music out into the world. Mm-hmm. And so I have to create my own infrastructure, and it's obviously a much smaller one, but that's the price I guess you pay for being independent.
Yeah. And I know this more on kind of the book writing side. The publishing industry, like kind of the Penguins and the big kind of book publishers out there, unless you already are a celebrity of some sort, they don't put a whole lot of skin in the game, and kind of the advance that they give you in terms of marketing and doing all the production, that inevitably, even if you have a book deal, you're still going to have to do that work. And I'm wondering, and so much of the kind of traditional publishing industry has completely changed because of the internet and because of Amazon, and I imagine Amazon Music. I saw that on your website, you have a little button at the bottom to get your albums through Amazon Music. So I'm wondering, even though, when you're talking about the con is that you don't have the infrastructure of these big, I'm thinking like Sony Music or something like that.
Right.
Is it changing because of the internet? And is it changing to the benefit of independent artists like yourself?
Well, yeah, my career I owe basically to that infrastructure for independent artists that didn't really exist before we had the World Wide Web. Mm-hmm. I'm 65 years old. They're not really looking for someone like me at the major labels. They want some cute young guy with I don't know, with whatever look they're looking for these days. Mm-hmm. I'm able to independently record all of my own music and put it out into the world, for better or worse. If people pick up on it and hear it and like it, that's great. If another artist wants to record some of it, that's great. I probably wouldn't be able to have a career if it weren't for the internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I have to manage my expectations also by not being with a major label.
What's been something that has surprised you because of the internet? And, as you have a great website, it seems like you have a good social media presence. Has there been something, as you continue to put yourself out there virtually, in terms of musicians coming to you to recognize, hey, we really like what you're doing, we want to collaborate? Anything that you just couldn't have anticipated when you got started doing this and having this kind of virtual presence?
Well, thankfully, I haven't had a lot of the negativity that's also associated with the internet. I haven't had a lot of people come blogging me or slagging me off or anything like that. I've got a lot of positive response. Well, I guess one of the surprises is when I see there's some algorithms on certain sites where you can actually track your music and where they're listening to it. And I'm always surprised when I see my songs getting played somewhere in Europe I've never been or something like that. It's always kind of fun.
Yeah. It's really cool. In the world of podcasting, you can kind of see traffic of where people are, at least on the show notes side of things. And so for whoever the folks are who listen in France or in Germany or it's really cool to see where people are downloading. And that's all that I really know about listeners at this point. So kind of somewhat similar. Yeah, it's really cool, the reach that you can have. It's also overwhelming, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you, because there's so many ways that you could distribute online, and I imagine, I'm just thinking of like book sites. So you have Amazon, but there's like Ingram Spark, and there's, there's a lot of other ways that people can access books. And I can imagine with music as well, there's probably a zillion different kind of sites that can distribute. And how do you make sense of that? Is it more just based on reputation, or is it easier just to be like, okay, Amazon Music, everyone goes to Amazon, so I'm just going to put the album there and hope that people will find it that way? Is there a strategy to it, or is it more just kind of trial and error at this point?
Well, for me as a musician, we have a really good resource that I released my music through called CD Baby. You've probably heard of it.
Yeah.
And they pretty much provide a pretty comprehensive infrastructure for independent musicians. They process your artwork. They print T-shirts for you. They help promote your gigs, make if you want vinyl, if you want CDs and streaming. They have everything set up. All you have to do is plug into it. And they make sure that your music or my music is released on all the major streaming services, which is my real main objective. I just want to have it available to be listened to by the widest possible audience. And so that's the resource I use.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, just promoting it where I can.
Yeah. So when you say promoting it, is it mostly through your social media, word of mouth? Like, do you have other strategies on how you get that word out, like for the new album?
I do word of mouth, but I'm trying to be careful not to abuse my friends too much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
and also social media, you have to be kind of judicious about that also. You don't want to overwhelm your friend base with just advertising your product.
Yep.
So you want to be. I do use that. All the usual social media suspects I do use, but I've learned to be a little bit more judicious about it and use some of the tools that they have to reach out to people that you wouldn't normally get. I hired a publicist for my last album. She's helping get it out there. And gosh, I'm probably forgetting some things, but that's some of the tools that I use.
Yeah, and I appreciate you talking about the hiring a publicist. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because I know that there are a number of folks who do have books, and the few musicians, if they do listen to the show, I'm sure they could benefit from understanding, what does that process look like? How did you decide, you know what, I think that I need to hire a professional to help me with this because that's their wheelhouse and I want to have more time to make music? And then how did you kind of decide on who you're working with right now?
That was easy for me. My husband put out a book a couple of years ago, a graphic novel called Journey to Gaytopia.
Oh, cool.
And he used a publicist for that, she isn't like a big corporate publicity house. She's more of a boutique publicist that's in the area, and she's well established in the queer community here in Los Angeles. And he used her and he liked her. And so when it was time, I also had some communications with her about telling her I would have a future project I might be able to send her way. And that's what we did. I used her for promotion for 2 or 3 months to just get the ball rolling when my album came out.
Nice.
We did like a month pre-promotion, then maybe a month and a half after the album actually dropped.
And did you notice a difference between using a publicist? Like, have you ever released an album where you didn't use a publicist, and what was it worth the investment?
It is worth the investment. You definitely get more ears and eyes by doing that. My first 2 albums, I did it with just using social media and word of mouth. And this was the first time I was actually able to get in. She got me a lot of magazine articles. She got me a lot of interviews. That definitely helped promote the album and get it out there to more ears.
This is super interesting. So thank you for kind of just walking us through things that are probably super basic for you. I think it's helpful for people just trying to get their voice out in the world. And a lot of people who tune into the show are very purpose-driven. So they're visionaries. They're like you very much, where they want to maximize as much of their time doing what they love doing and kind of outsourcing as much as possible, and a lot of folks are doing this all on their own right now to make sure that they can shine their genius more. So
I do outsource a lot whenever possible.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like yard work. I don't like to do yard work, so I hire someone to cut my grass.
Yeah. And that's, it's definitely the dream, and the thing that I often say on the show is that, when you're getting started, it's probably a good idea to understand all of the things that need to get done to make music or to write a book or do the things that you really want to do. Because when you're capable and you're starting to make a profit and you have some additional resources, when you're able to like outsource or delegate that work, you can describe it and you could define what success looks like for those folks so that they could do it well, because you've done it. So
Yeah, you learn a little bit as you go with each project. You get a little bit better.
mhm.
You get better at not only the recording of your music and making it sound better with each project, you get better at what works and what doesn't work in the marketplace and how you can best spend your time and your money
Yeah,
in that
absolutely.
regard.
Absolutely. So you and I both grew up in Florida. You grew up in South Florida, which I think is much cooler than Central Florida. So, but
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Brevard County, the Space Coast. So I got to see the space shuttles
Okay.
launch in my backyard when I was a little kid. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, and you were in South Florida, and you got started writing music in junior high. And so, we were chatting a little bit before this interview, but I was hoping you could share again, as you were on the path to being a musician full time, you also worked for other people. Talk to us about the point where you were all in and you took the leap to just do this full time. What was going on for you then, and how did you have faith in yourself, knowing that you could do this and live out your dream?
It actually didn't happen until about 10 years ago. I had always written songs. I had songs in notebooks. I had songs in my head. I even had some songs notated that I'd never done really anything with. They were just kind of a dream laying dormant in my consciousness. With programs that you have, apps that you have now, it started with GarageBand, and now I use Logic Pro X a lot to do my demos. It became possible for me to go into these programs and record all the parts to my songs and bring them to life so other people could hear them. And I had a couple requests for theme songs, or could you write me a song to do this or that? And so I started working with those apps to bring that about. And when I started doing that, the floodgates kind of opened up, and all of a sudden I had all of these songs. And, I went back to some of my old musician contacts that I'd had over the years and asked them, would you be interested in playing on this? Would you be interested in helping me engineer this and make it sound better? And before I knew it, I had a full album project going full steam ahead. And so in the course of maybe those 10 years, I wrote a lot of music, and I've recorded and released 3 albums. So it's kind of
Wow.
It's kind of happened very fast.
That's pretty incredible.
Once I got the ball rolling, it all started to come together.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I think for many of us, we have this dream, we have this purpose. We're trying to get more and more clear on what it is and how we can build our lives around that. And for you, this is a lifelong pursuit. It's something you've always done, and there was the opportunity a decade ago to do it. And
the technology kind of caught up with my my aspirations. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, like anything, technology can be a double-edged sword, right? And I do think in terms of creative pursuits, there's so many ways that we can use the internet in particular to our advantage, and really sharing our voice, amplifying what it is that lights us up, that connects us with more people that love what you're doing. They want to listen to your music. They want to shower you with like the resources so you can continue doing that. And I think that's really inspirational for any of us tuning in, where we're still on the path. We're still trying to do the thing that we set out to do. And it might look different now than what it's going to look like tomorrow. I remember reading this somewhere, so, this is paraphrased, but it's like, for us, when we set intentions for the year, sometimes it feels like we're not really moving the needle that far from January 1st to December 31st of the same year. But when we look a decade ahead, or a decade, I think any of us, if we look a decade ago, we're really, really different people than we were 10 years ago. And so just imagine 10 years in advance what's possible. And I think that just kind of your origin story really shines a light on what is possible. 10 years ago, before you saw that possibility of doing this full time, where you are now, 3 albums later, right? I mean, so many fans later. Could you have imagined that? That's just so cool, right? It's just that perspective, I think, is really powerful about what's possible. If we just stay committed and we finish one course until we're successful. And yeah. I sense in your voice, you're like, it's always like, once you do it, you had your first album out, maybe that was like your initial goal of like, I just want a album out in the world. And then you did it and you kind of moved the goalposts further down about what's possible. And that's always cool too.
You kind of take it one project at a time. I try not to get too far ahead of myself because you never know what's coming and you never know how you might change and go in a different direction. But as I did get going, I find myself like 2 or 3 projects cooking at once. I'd have one that I'm actually working on. I'd have one that I'm conceiving of, another one that's like more of a vague conception that I want to do sometime in the future. Because I'm pretty eclectic and have pretty broad musical taste, and so I try to divide the music up into projects that make sense for people.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that makes total sense. And I like what you're saying about just being open and having a vision of where you want to go and not being too rigid around that, because that's where the opportunities show up. And oftentimes opportunities that you may have never imagined. Yeah.
Part of that is collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
Because I collaborate with an old friend of mine from Florida. She's actually from Massachusetts, but I met her in Florida. Patty Sanders, my producer. And whenever we start an album, it never ends up being exactly what I envisioned when I started it. It always evolves into something else. There's always a couple songs that don't quite make it to the end, and I'm always writing new songs, so maybe they get put on there, or something happens in the world. I write a new song about it, and I'm like, I have to put that in there too. So it's an evolving process.
Yeah, and
it never looks exactly at the end. It never looks exactly the way you might have envisioned it, but it might be something better if you keep an open mind to it.
Hi, Outbosses. Rhodes Perry here. As you all know, part of my passion for this podcast is to empower you and fellow LGBTQ entrepreneurs to cultivate a feeling of purpose and belonging in your business, to know you can show up and be the most authentic version of yourself. Purpose, belonging, and workplace culture are concepts I take seriously in my own consulting practice. I'm dedicated to growing the belonging movement to empower leaders just like you, from the largest organizations to the smallest, to build healthier workplaces. That's why I'm thrilled to share everyday practices you can take to build more inclusive workplaces in my best-selling book, Belonging at Work. The book features some of today's leading diversity, equity, and inclusion thought leaders who share some of their wisdom, skills, and stories to give you the confidence necessary to stitch a sense of belonging into the fabric of your organization. To get your own copy of the book, visit rhodesonamazon.com. There you can find a paperback, Kindle, Audible, and hard copy version of the book. Again, that's rhodesonamazon.com. Together, let's grow the belonging movement. I'm not a musician, but as someone who writes, what you're saying resonates with me, because, I'll set out to write something, and the process itself, you kind of take twists and turns as you go, into an outline that you write. And when you're done with the final product, it could be completely different sometimes or slightly different, but it's often different than kind of that initial vision. And oftentimes it's better. So just kind of two brains, working with Patty or, with the entire team that it takes to put out an album. By the time you're at the finish line, there's just so many brains that have helped kind of strengthen that initial vision that you had, which is cool. I mean, I feel like that's the nature of music too, right? I take it back. I used to play clarinet and band, and like concert band. So there is that magic of the part that you play, but then when you're playing with other people, it's just iterative. And I think it just makes it richer and a better experience.
Yeah, I think when you're working in any collaborative art form like music or even film, your first impulse is usually just a sketch or an outline of and then you fill it in as you go along. And some things work, some things don't work, and other new things come along. So you just try to build something, mold the clay into a final thing and put it out into the world. And you're never done with these projects, by the way. There's always like, oh yeah. But I wish I could do that over again.
Hey, what's cool about it, and I'm curious your take on this, is, when you put out something into the world, you have an experience with it, Patty has an experience with it, the other people on your team have an experience with the album. It's when you get that feedback, and in your bio, I love that you said, you love getting kind of the listener feedback. What's that experience like for you when you have this vision of like the kind of the spirit of your music and what you're trying to communicate? When your fans come back to you to say, "Oh, Donovan, we love this new album," and then they start to share their experiences of how the music has impacted their lives, like what's that experience like to live your art through someone else's eyes?
Yeah, it's really humbling, and in some cases, someone says, "I was in a bad mood. I put on your album, and it kind of brightened up my whole day." You know, I didn't really expect that, really, but when I hear something like that, it really, it's kind of humbling and fulfilling at the same time. But it's also, I love to hear stories from people, and one of the things that I try never to do is some people ask me to explain my songs, and I try to steer away from that, because one of the most fun things is having someone listen to a song and come back and tell me what it meant to them, and it will be something completely different than I imagined or my intentions were when I wrote it. But it will be equally as valid, or maybe even better than my own initial impulse.
Yep.
And so, I always try to let people have their own experience of the stuff, and then have the fun of having them share what their experience was.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's powerful because I mean you're in the business of art, and art is about connection and eliciting emotion from other people. And I think as humans, I think those are our ultimate superpowers, are our emotions. And to positively impact emotions is a gift. Mm-hmm. So thank you for doing that in the world. I think we need a lot more of that for sure. So like right now in music, I mean, I often ask this question for business owners in general of what makes your heart sing? So literally, like what is making your heart sing in music? Like what's the thing that lights you up about what's possible in your business and your art, and what's next for you?
Right now, I've never been much of a guitar player, and so I've been learning to play guitar. Right now, I've always made fun of guitar players and their obsession with their guitars and their equipment and whatnot. And now I'm one of those people. I've found out what they were obsessing about, and
yep.
I'm kind of having fun with it. But right now, that's kind of what I'm motivated to do right now. It also gives me another tool to write music with.
Yeah, so. That's cool. That's cool. And I'm sure that the folks who follow your music pretty closely will be excited to hear how you're going to like weave that into how, the kind of the genre that you're doing right now. And I think with R&B and jazz, that makes sense. The jazz guitars, the little bit that I know, I'm like, it's always fun to listen to. So that's really cool. Is that on your new album right now, or is that for the next one, for number 4?
I don't know when I'll actually be playing guitar on any of my recordings. I know too many really good guitar players.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's going to happen. But for me, it's all about the writing, and it's a writing tool for me.
Okay.
So
I see.
It's something I can use to have a different palette to write with.
That's cool. That's very cool. So we're going to kind of jump into the next part of the interview, which is really just, this is all about being an out entrepreneur. So talking a little bit about our experiences in the Rainbow family when it comes to work in the world of music and perhaps other jobs that you've had along the way that allows you to be an amazing musician. And so my first question for you is if you could talk to us about a time where it might have been difficult for you to bring your whole self to your job or even in music, in terms of the past, maybe not now, where you felt like you weren't safe enough, or that you thought that you wouldn't get an opportunity because you're part of the LGBT community. So does something come to mind for you? And the reason why I like to ask this question is because there's a lot of business owners or folks just thinking about getting started in business, and they're not totally sure how to negotiate how out they can be at work, or if they can be out at all. So any kind of stories that are real that can be shared and ways that you've found to work around some of these challenges can definitely offer some inspiration for folks still struggling.
Well, I when you're asking that question, I was thinking about how long it took me to actually put my songs and my voice out into the world. I'm 65 now, so I was like in my late 50s before I actually started doing this. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons it took me so long was the fear of failure, the fear that people would laugh at what I was doing, that it wouldn't be accepted very well. And all of those fears melted away when I mustered the courage to do it. And I think part of those fears came from me being a gay kid in South Florida at a time when South Florida was not a mecca for gay people like it kind of is a little bit now. For me, it was just kind of a backwater. I don't know what your experience was or how old you are, but yeah. So it was just coming to terms. Part of me moving to Los Angeles was I didn't see myself having a relationship or falling in love and having a fulfilling life when I was in Florida. So I moved. I moved to Los Angeles where the gay community was. And I was out to just a couple of my close friends in Florida. But when I moved out here in the early 80s, I came all the way out both to my friends and to my coworkers. And here they were ready for it culturally. So it was hard for me to do psychologically, but it was so worth it. And I had so many mentors. The more you come out, the more people you find that help you along your path. Yeah. My first boyfriend was a really strong out gay man, and he helped me find my own strength.
Yeah.
And so
this is really powerful. It just kind of what you initially said, when you were just thinking about getting started in your music, the fear of failure, the kind of laughing at you, the shame, not being accepted. I think as a gay person, you have, from my generation, shame comes along with realizing that you're gay and overcoming those things. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of psychological work to get to the point where you can be out and proud. 100%. Yeah.
I feel I'm really lucky to live in an era where we've come to that point, because 50 years ago or 100 years ago, it must have been much harder for those people to find their way in the world. Today, I'm happily married and recognized by the government, which is a nice thing.
Yeah.
I remember in 2004 when we went to San Francisco and got married for the first time, how I felt this burden lift from me that I didn't even know was there. It was just, okay, I was able to go in City Hall and get married and be accepted. I finally arrived in society where I can just be me.
Yeah.
And you really carry a burden around with you that you don't even realize is there. And it's probably an impediment to most people and to doing the things you want to do. But, at the same time, there's strong gay people throughout history who have used their queerness to be a motivator and to make them even stronger and greater artists. So, I'm sure it cuts both ways, but for me, it was something I had to overcome.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying, because it's the other side of it. You were talking about these things before you got started putting out your music or just kind of like really owning being a musician. And you had said all of that melted away as soon as I started. Like you were in your power, you stepped into your power. And I thought that's really powerful. And kind of this, like, I think another important piece of what you shared is this piece on Florida, like where you lived and where you grew up, where it was not by any stretch of the means, and I would argue it still has a long way to go, other than maybe certain pockets of Florida, as being this kind of mecca of acceptance for LGBT folks broadly. And the fact that a gifted musician like yourself was just compelled to move because I'm imagining, and sorry if I'm not saying this incorrectly, but you didn't see a bright future staying in Florida. You had to go to Los Angeles to seek that out. And, in the kind of advocacy work that I've done, we call that brain drain. It's like really smart, talented people who happen to be a part of the LGBT community or perhaps another marginalized community, leaving certain areas because either the perception or the reality that, like, it's just you're not going to be accepted. That's a massive loss, right? And that's Los Angeles's gain, because you're there and you were able to have a boyfriend at that time who allowed you to further step into your power and say it's okay to be gay, it's okay to be together. And you had that really positive possibility model that I wish for everyone in the Rainbow family to have. And I know for some folks listening that might still feel impossible, even though it's 2019. But the point what you're talking about of the government recognizing your marriage, no longer a second-class citizen in terms of the way that your relationship is
Right.
because of your
Maybe
relationship. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I should have said society instead of government, but
Oh yeah, totally. But there's,
Yeah.
but I think like there's greater awareness, there's more positive visibility, at least in our culture here in the United States. And, we still have work to do for sure. But I think your message is really powerful on some of the challenges that still exist for us, just living our lives, this kind of like invisible burden, and, how that can show up in our work. And I really liked what you're saying at the end, where, you're talking about, folks 100 years ago, who happen to be LGBT, and just like using queerness as a motivator, as like difference because of society treating us differently, that motivates us to kind of shine brighter. And I'm wondering for you as a musician, if you use those lived experiences of, thinking about your younger self living in Florida, or even now, just because of your lived experiences of being a part of the Rainbow family, do you see that as something, as a superpower of some sort that allows you to stand out in your music?
Definitely. I talked about it being kind of a rock we have to push up the hill when you're younger and geographically challenged. Mm-hmm. But it's also a great gift because it allows you to see the world from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And it allows you to kind of ferret out all the falseness and all the BS that is part of our regular world. You see that from a very young age as what it is.
Yeah.
So I think that perspective of seeing the world, not from the point of view of what people are telling you it is, but what you discover it to be from within yourself and from your own personal experience. I think it forces you to be honest about a lot of things that a lot of people aren't honest about.
Yeah.
And on the other side, there are probably a lot of closeted gay people that it pushes them in another direction if they can't come to terms with it. So
yeah.
But yeah, for me, it's definitely a gift. It allows me to look at the world from a better perspective, I think, and I bring that into my music for sure.
It causes you to peel back the layers, right? I mean, you get to the core of. I think it speeds up the process of what we as humans on this planet are meant to do, which is self-actualize and really figure out who we are, no matter like the pressures of society trying to push us to all be the same like robots. I mean, that's not what we're meant to do. Uh-huh. We're meant to really listen to our hearts and our intuition and shine a positive light, I think. And I think in part we do that by really figuring out who we are and what we want and how to do that in this lifetime. And I think you speak really well to that, as that it is a blessing that comes with, it's kind of like a rose. There's some thorns around it, and the thorns are some of the, the discrimination and the ignorance that folks that aren't super familiar with who we are, inflict upon us for better or worse, but we get stronger from it. So yeah, I really like that. I like what you shared there. Kind of in wrapping up the interview, just a few more questions for you. And the first is recognizing that there's a lot of folks tuning in, regardless of where they're at age-wise, right? But they're thinking about getting started as an entrepreneur. What advice would you give for those folks just to take that first entrepreneurial leap?
The first thing I would say is don't be afraid to fail. Mm-hmm. Like Samuel Beckett said, fail better the next time.
Yeah, I like that.
And that would be my biggest piece of advice. That was the biggest thing I had to overcome is the fear of failure.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of that. Just go for it.
Yep. I think
figure out what you want. Yeah. Figure out what you want to do and do whatever you need to do. Enlist whatever people you need to enlist and push forward.
That's great. I like that.
Do it.
Yeah. Fail better the next time.
By the way.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. I mean, if you feel something in your heart, and if you're telling yourself kind of a false belief of it's too late. It's like, no, if you're here, your heart is pumping and you have that fire in your belly, try, Yeah,
this is your life. Go out and do it.
Yeah.
Actualize yourself and live your life to the fullest. Don't be afraid.
I love it. I love that. So we're now kind of nearing the end of our interview, and I would love it, Donovan, if you could just share with us where we can find you, where we can learn more about your new album. I'm sure lots of folks are like, okay, we want to tune into this music. So how do we support you? How do we support your music?
You can go to any streaming service, whether it's iTunes or Tidal or Spotify. and you can hear my music. Or Amazon, you can purchase my music through some of those sites. You can stream it through other sites. You can go to my website, donovanholden.com, and purchase my music or hear my music through that. You can also see my videos there. You can also go to YouTube, put in Donovan Holden, and you can hear my music there, and also see the new music video from my latest album. It's called Lunch in Paris. My latest album, that's the video, and that has my husband doing the animation work. It's a really nice, fun piece. I recommend it. My latest album is called A Better Day. Excuse me, I'm sorry. It's called A Brighter Day, not A Better Day. And those are the places you can go.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we will include all of that in our show notes because that's a lot of good stuff, and especially the video as well. We can share that on social media when your show comes out. So I really loved our conversation. I think I learned a lot. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about the music industry and how to set yourself apart as an independent artist. And thank you again for being here. And for Outbosses, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. It is always a privilege to connect with you and so many inspiring outbosses like Donovan. So again, if you want to check out these amazing resources that Donovan was sharing, the video, to get the album, to learn more about other albums that he's produced, please check out those show notes. It's at outentrepreneur.com. You could text Outboss to 444-999 and get the show notes that way. And if you haven't yet, please let us know what your thoughts are on the show by leaving a rating and review wherever you consume your podcasts. But iTunes is usually very helpful for us so that the show gets noticed by other folks. And as always, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.